Oh, good morning, church. So this month we've been digging into chapters 1 and 2 of Genesis. We're learning about what it means that we are created in God's image and how that affects our understanding of our purpose in life. To review quickly, we saw that there are 7 primary characteristics that are included in the image of God: rationality, personhood, communication, relationship, creativity, rulership, and responsibility. All of those are significant. They constitute the features of being human that distinguish us from the rest of creation. But the most essential of those features is the last one, our ability to respond freely to God and the moral obligation to obey His commands. We also saw that our capacity to govern ourselves and others, what we call rulership, was an inherent aspect of the image of God that was tied to our purpose. As God's representatives, we have been entrusted with the governance of this world. And we rule not as entitled tyrants exploiting the earth for our own benefit, but as stewards, caring for the world and the people in our charge to bring it and them to maximum fruitfulness and to fulfill God's purposes for His kingdom. Now, before we get started on today's message, I want to let you know that when I planned this series of sermons, it never occurred to me that today is the day after Valentine's Day. Now, as it happens, it's a nice coincidence that we can look at a passage that is central to the biblical teaching about marriage right after Valentine's Day. But I promise you, I'm not that clever or aware of dates. However, since yesterday was Valentine's Day, let me point out that one of the problems we face in our country today is a crisis of loneliness. And we see this in multiple areas of our society. People everywhere, not just young adults, people everywhere are trying to find love or something that imitates love in all the wrong places. They're trying casual sex, living together with a romantic partner, and so-called open relationships. Having a series of sexual partners is now regarded as a necessary element in one's personal development. No surprise, then, that there are a slew of apps you can download to your phone to match you with someone who wants to meet just to have sex. Viewing and producing pornography is considered normal. And more people are opting for virtual relationships with AI instead of a personal relationship with a human being. Add to this the number of single people who are perpetually sad and frustrated, searching endlessly for the one, the guy or the girl who will fulfill all of their needs and make them happy. And let's not forget all of the married couples who are living together because it's easier than splitting up, but who have given up any hope of ever having a deep or meaningful relationship with their spouse. They live in the same house, they follow a pattern that gets them through each week, they may even go to church together. But their relational connection has gone dry. Despite having a marriage certificate that says they belong together, they are desperately lonely. This crisis of loneliness is mounting in our world, and it is leaving a lot of people so frustrated that they are in danger of developing serious mental health problems. And part of the problem is this lie that we have believed, a fantasy that comes to us courtesy of romance novels and rom-coms and our own lusts and our own imaginations. And the lie is that there is someone out there who can fulfill all of my needs and desires. And that lie then feeds my expectations. The man or the woman of my dreams, the person that I will find and marry, will be someone who perfectly matches my checklist of what I believe I need. And if I can't find that person, I'm doomed to a life of lonely despair. There are 2 problems with that conclusion, however. First, my expectations rarely, if ever, match with reality. And I say my, meaning all of us. There is no one in the world who can meet all of your needs, much less all of your desires. Think about the needs and desires you have. Your emotional and physical needs, your need for security, your need to feel pretty, your need to be a hero or to fix or save someone, your need to be admired, your desire to be wanted, your desire to be heard and appreciated, to feel useful, and all of the other needs and desires that are peculiar to you. If you think that the person whom you love, the person you will marry, or the person whom you did marry, should be able to meet all of your needs, then you are putting far more weight on that person or that relationship than he or she or it is able to bear. I don't care how wonderful he or she is. No one can bear the weight of those expectations. Why? Because none of us is omnicompetent. Some things you need aren't things your spouse is capable of providing. And there are some needs and desires that only God can fulfill. When we expect our spouse to meet all of our needs and all our desires, we set up that person for failure and we set ourselves up for disappointment and frustration. And the second problem with looking for this imaginary person to come along who miraculously meets every need and desire I have is that I'm pursuing a fantasy, not an achievable goal. I'm spending my time looking for this perfect creature to appear on my radar instead of focusing on my personal development so that I can become a healthy and capable and spiritually mature person who's actually able to enter into a relationship, marriage, one that requires commitment, true concern for another person, and sacrificial giving. As long as I'm driven by this compulsion to have my needs and desires fulfilled, someone to take care of me, someone to do my laundry, someone to admire me, someone to need my help, etc., etc., etc. As long as I'm driven by that compulsion, relationships will always be transactional, not loving, not personal. And transactional relationships, by definition, cannot be personally fulfilling or spiritually fruitful. They will always also be frustrating, which means that I will go from relationship to relationship over and over again, always looking for the imaginary person who checks all of the boxes on my list. Or I give up in despair, disappear into isolation and depression, and feed my needs with substitutes that can never satisfy. Romance novels, pornography, video games, hobbies, work, gardening, volunteering, whatever. But one of the most important verses in our passages, the passages we read this morning, confronts us at this very point. After saying repeatedly that God saw what he had created and pronounced it to be good, Genesis 2:18 tells us that after God had created Adam, he said, "It is not good for the man to be alone." The crisis of loneliness that is ripping through our society today is not new. It's just been repackaged and enhanced. We were not created to live alone. Isolation is contrary to God's purpose in making people, in making us male and female, and in making us in his image. We can find two solutions to this crisis of loneliness in this story of the creation of men and women in God's image. The first solution is God's plan for marriage. I say this to couples in premarital counseling all the time. Marriage is God's idea, not ours. Marriage is not a cultural construct or a philosophical ideal. God thought it up, every part of it. He made men and women, and he pictured the marriage relationship for us when he brought the first woman, Eve, to the first man, Adam. Marriage, according to God, is for one man and one woman. It is his general plan for humanity, the normal way for families and societies to develop. And that means, for most of us, marriage should be what we expect for our life. That this expectation has changed so dramatically in the last 50 years does not mean that marriage is an outdated relic of an unenlightened former age. It just means that we as a people have fallen so far from God's ways that we completely misunderstand the gift that God gave to us. When God brought Eve to Adam, Adam immediately recognized her as someone like himself. We see this in the verses just after our reading from today. In verse 23, the man said, "This is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of man." Even though she was different as a female, he saw her in his own likeness. This was another human being. She wasn't a divine being, but she also wasn't simply another one of the animals. Like him, she was created in God's image, sharing in all the characteristics that made him human, but differentiated from him in that she was female. Because they each shared in the likeness of God, they were each responsible to God and thus dependent upon God for life, for direction, for their purpose. And because they shared equally in that likeness of God, they were partners, paired together to accomplish the work that God had given humans so that they would fulfill God's purpose for creating them. So let's think then about what we can grasp of God's intention for marriage from this picture we see in Adam and Eve. And Genesis 2 gives us a few of the essentials for a good marriage. First of all, a good marriage begins with genuine attraction. Adam saw Eve and knew that they belonged together. She was not just another interesting creature to write about in his journal. Dear diary, guess what I saw today? No, this woman attracted his interest in a way completely different from anything else he saw that God had made. This woman grabbed his attention. He felt something rising up in his soul. She's a part of me. Something about her pulls me toward her. I find myself wanting to be with her in a way that's different from being with anyone or anything else. Now let's pause. Obviously, the situation is a bit different for us today. Guys, you have more choices available to you than Adam did. Okay? And ladies, fortunately for you, the same is also true. But we all know that we are attracted to different people in different ways. Ladies, you know that there are men that you don't want anything to do with them. And there are others that you like to talk to or find interesting, but you're not particularly interested in them romantically. Men, you know this as well. There are women you might find physically attractive or whom you admire or appreciate for certain qualities, but you're not interested in developing a romantic relationship with them. But for all of us, there are those people whom we find ourselves intensely attracted to. Hopefully, if you're married, one of them is your spouse. And by the way, all of us are attracted to people of both sexes in various ways. We find certain persons interesting or amusing, or we appreciate their skills or their character qualities, or we just like them. But being attracted to someone does not mean that we must or should have a sexual encounter with them or become romantically involved. The point is that God uses attraction to help us figure out who might be a good marriage partner. It is His gift to us, but it's only part of the equation. Another thing that a good marriage needs is a basis. The basis is not attraction. The basis is a mutual commitment. That commitment is twofold. It is a commitment that each partner makes to the other, cleaving to one another or being united to one another is the wording we see a little bit later in verse 25. That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. In a good marriage, who we are is more important than who I was. What matters is what we choose, not what I want. A marriage thrives when each partner refuses anything that might separate them. They each resolutely and irrevocably commit to be united with one another, to face every attack against either of them as an attack on both of them. They fight for each other instead of with each other, choosing to lay down their lives for each other and for their marriage instead of putting their own preferences first. They serve each other and build each other up because they are committed to do what best brings good to the other. That is what will maintain their union. But marriage is also a commitment to God. Adam and Eve, representing the whole of humanity, were given a command to rule over the world, to bring the earth and its people, their descendants, to maximal fruitfulness. And their marriage signaled their commitment to fulfilling God's purpose for their lives. The same way, our marriages represent our commitment to God to fulfill His plan for human beings. Marriage is not just a way to prevent rampant immorality. It is God's plan for human flourishing, to bring goodness to human societies through the establishment of holy unions that develop into godly families. And I have found that Jesus' instructions to His disciples offers the best marriage counsel there is. From Matthew chapter 7, 24 to 25. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down and the streams rose and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. If both partners in the marriage build their marriage on Jesus and His teachings, their union will withstand all of the stresses and storms that threaten to rip them apart. He will hold them together as they remain committed to Him and to one another. Solving the crisis of loneliness will require that we as Christians who are committed to following Jesus and living according to His ways choose to build our marriages on the foundation of Jesus Christ and biblical teaching. We model our marriages on what God says is true instead of listening to the nonsense that comes from fictional portrayals from Hollywood or romance novels or influencers on TikTok or comedians on YouTube. We must teach our children how to prepare themselves for marriage by guiding their development, training their expectations, helping them become healthy, spiritually mature, and confident adults who are able to follow Jesus on their own and discern His direction for their lives. But there's another part of the solution to the crisis of loneliness besides developing healthy Christians who have healthy marriages. What about all the people who aren't married? How do we help them deal with loneliness? The very first thing we have to do is acknowledge the reality. The number of adults who are single in our country is rapidly increasing. It hasn't yet passed the number of adults who are married, but it may soon do so, though there are some encouraging new trends that could help us reverse the repudiation of marriage that has hurt our nation tremendously. All of those millions of singles are single in different ways, at different points in their lives, and for different reasons. For many single adults, marriage is an unlikely future, or at least one that they cannot foresee at the moment. Perhaps they are widowed and have no desire to marry again. Perhaps they are divorced and are still quite hurt from the breakup and have been forced into a very difficult situation with kids and work and all sorts of juggling that doesn't leave any time for building a new relationship. Or maybe they're in the middle of life and there aren't any good prospects. I recently spoke with two different Christian women, both of them single, each of whom made it clear that though she would welcome a chance to marry a solid Christian man, she wasn't going to settle for a guy who wasn't strongly following Jesus himself and supportive of her in her own walk in ministry for the Lord. And both of them knew what is not said out loud very often, which is that there aren't a lot of solid Christian single men from which to choose. So how can we help solve the loneliness problem for singles, many of whom might not find a marriage partner? The second answer that we can glean from Genesis 1 to 2 is rooted in the more general creation principle that we find in the creation of men and women. When God said, "It is not good for the man to be alone," marriage was not the only thing in His mind. He was stating a general truth that applied to the state of being human and being given the responsibility to care for the earth. Yes, Adam and Eve needed to have children, and He needed her in order to do that, so they could increase, so they could fill the earth, so they could make it fruitful, subdue it. Men and women, two distinct and different sexes, were God's design for marriage, for how we would live in this world, how we would procreate, how we would develop families. But men and women in healthy relationships with one another was also God's design for how we would live together outside of marriage. God made men and women, two distinct and different sexes, because we need each other to be well-developed persons, to live meaningfully, and to have well-functioning societies. We're going to talk more about that next week. We need marriages and families, but we also need friendships, because it's still not good for anyone to be alone. Community has become a bit of a buzzword. It's replaced the word family in many ways. Basically, we stretched the meaning of the word family so far until it didn't mean anything recognizable at all. Pittsburgh Pirates baseball team is a family, maybe. So we replaced it with community. And now everyone who buys something from Home Depot or Taco John's supposedly becomes a part of the Home Depot community or the Taco John's community. If all we really have in common is occasionally shopping at a store or eating at a fast food restaurant, we're not really a community in any meaningful sense of the word. But even if the word has gotten used in ways that twist or even vacate its genuine meaning, we can still realize the good in the word as it describes God's intention for people. We were created by God, designed by Him to live in communities where we share life together. It's part of the image of God, the capacity to form relationships that are both personal and meaningful, not just categorical. From the start, God created men and women, people who shared something in common. They both carry the image of God in equal measure, but who are distinctly different precisely because those differences are necessary for us to fulfill what God made us to be. We need other people in our lives, people who are distinctly different from us, including people of the opposite sex, if we're going to grow into the people we need to become, and if we're going to fulfill God's intentions for us as a species and as individual people. We cannot grow in healthy ways in isolation. No one can. We cannot handle the job of stewarding this planet without the cooperation, the contributions, and the influence of other people. No one develops well in isolation. We all need what we can only get from being in relationships with other people. Apart from God's grace and supernatural intervention, the most extreme introvert who wants only to be left alone is set on a path that leads to destruction. Because left to yourself, you'll grow twisted, emotionally stunted, mentally unstable, as wounds from hurts fester and turn to bitterness and resentment and cynicism, and a hardened heart follow after quite quickly. It may be challenging for you to open up to others. I know that's true for me. But doing so is the only way to be truly healthy. It's the only way to discover what God has provided for your personal and spiritual growth that only comes through other people, so that you can become the very best version of yourself. And the same is true for the most extreme extrovert. It's not as easy to spot. Extroverts love the action and the crowds and being with all their people. It's always their people. They're the ones with all the people. The more the merrier. But quite often, the constant activity and being with the crowd is nothing more than a shallow, surface-level interaction masquerading as a relationship. It energizes me so that I feel better while leaving me empty inside. I mistake activity for meaning. I mistake celebration for significance and explosions of energy for personal encounter and connection. Extroverts might be energized by being with the crowds and slapping hands with as many people as possible, but they also need time with God alone or with a friend. They need to learn how to develop deep relationships with a few people to whom they can bare their soul. That's the only way they can grow deeply, so their spiritually alive and not just riding the waves of rousing emotional experiences. Both introverts and extroverts need deep and meaningful connections with people, which requires sharing our lives, not just our moments. Community is more than meetings, more than gathering times, though gathering can help to foster community. Community is built through sharing life together. Christian community is built when we share our faith as a crucial element in sharing our lives together. And we develop community when we use what God has given us to enhance the lives of people with whom I'm connected through our shared faith in our life. Isn't that a huge part of what it means to help steward this world for God's purposes? We bring the goodness of God that He's shown to us to someone else by sharing it with them. We take what God has developed in or through us, and we use that to help someone else develop in their lives so that what God has planted in us becomes fully fruitful, fully activated in another person. And we do that not as a random interloper riding by and tossing things out the window at them like a spiritual Pony Express rider. No, we do that by befriending others. We bring the love of God to someone, helping them escape their own personal crisis of loneliness by sharing ourselves openly, honestly, lovingly with someone who needs what we have to give. Everyone needs a friend. People who don't know Jesus need the gospel, but they also need a friend. And they'll hear the gospel more clearly when they hear it through the lips of someone they know cares about them, someone who has become a friend to them. That's how we can help cure the crisis of loneliness. By building and sustaining good marriages that develop strong families, and by intentionally befriending other people so that we and they can develop into healthy communities who are bringing God's goodness to others, to the world.